Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. And welcome back to September Reading Rewind Part 2. So I thought I would be able to keep it tight because I did other videos about the books I read this month, but I can't. I just need to talk my fanny off all the time. So we're gonna dive into the second part of what I read in the month of September. The next book I wanted to talk about is There Still Sex in the City by Candace Bushnell. And I wound up listening to the audiobook of this, which was available on Hoopla, which I was surprised / happy to find because it's a pretty new release. And it's funny, I've seen a bunch of reviews on this. So out of the gate, this is not about Carrie and Samantha and Charlotte and Miranda. This is not a Sex in the City sequel. So I think probably part of the title was to get people to pick it up right away because that's maybe what they're thinking, but also Sex in the City was Candace Bushnell's column. So this is her story. So this is more a memoir of her, and it's about being, in your 50s, 60s in New York, sort of a little bit outside of New York, divorced, sort of single again. And, is there still Sex in the City at this age and at this time? And she does the narration herself in the book, which I love. I'm a fan of hers. I'm a fan of her writing. I was a huge fan of Sex in the City, the TV show. But again, this has nothing to do with that. So if you're looking to see what happened to Carrie, this is not what this book is. This is 100% Candace Bushnell's sort of memoir-ish, observations on life. So that's my timer. Sorry, I had to get up. So if I look like I'm sitting someplace different, it's because I am. But anyway, back to Is There Still Sex in the City? So not about Carrie, Miranda, and friends. It is Candace Bushnell's observations on life as a 50-something, 60-something woman, divorced again, or divorced, period. Actually, I shouldn't say divorced again. Divorced, newly single, later in life. And it's about her and her friends and sort of where everyone is at sort of this stage of their life. And I enjoyed it, although I will say it is moderately depressing, and I think more so depressing because it is reality, and it is people dealing with death of parents and loved ones, pets. It's about addiction, it's about drinking, it's about, I think in some ways, people trying to cling to the past, people not being able to move on with their lives. It's about depression and loneliness. It's heavy. It's not the most optimistic book, I would say, but at the same time, I feel like it is a reality that lots of people are facing. And I've seen a bunch of reviews on this also. Like I said, the people who thought it was going to be like the TV show, but then also people who were like, oh, I didn't like it, I didn't get it, blah, 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 blah. And I feel like a lot of the people whose reviews I saw were people who were younger. And this is gonna sound snarky, and I don't mean for it to. So I was not the same age as Carrie, so I didn't age along with Carrie. I was, younger when the show came out, but not high school young. So I feel like for those of us of a certain generation and a certain age can relate more to what she's going through and what she's talking about. Whereas I feel like people who are in their 20s right now, or maybe even early 30, might not get it. But I really feel for people who are in their 20s are not going to relate to a lot of what she's talking about in this. Where I feel like those of us who have lived a bit longer and seen a lot of things and maybe experienced some of these losses ourselves might have a different level of understanding. So it's not, like I said, it's not the most uplifting feel-good story of the year, but it's a short audiobook. I'm glad I listened to it. I do enjoy Candace Bushnell's writing voice, not just the fact that she physically narrates the audiobook, but I like her voice. It sounds very Sex in the City, it's true to who she is as a writer. So I sort of enjoy that part of it. It's told in vignettes. There was one vignette about sort of an ex and his son, and they kind of come to live with her, which I didn't love so much. And also one thing I found really strange, and maybe this is just my own preconceived notion, is she does this whole thing with being in Manhattan and seeing the women in Manhattan, and it's like expensive skincare, and there's like a, you know, like a whole kind of like makeup beauty part of it. But she's talking about like how she's not rich and how she can't afford all this stuff. But like, I would think she made a lot of money from Sex and the City, and I mean, maybe she didn't get a great deal, but I feel like she owns the rights to all that stuff. So I would feel like between like the TV show, the syndication, and the movies afterwards, that she probably is doing like pretty decent for herself. So I don't know. I just had a hard time listening to her say about like how she doesn't have money and talking about like all these rich women in Manhattan. And I know that there's like different levels of rich and that there's like crazy rich in Manhattan, just like there aren't other places, but that didn't quite connect for me. But anyway, it was a good kind of like palate cleanser-y, just sort of like had it on while I was doing some cleaning around the house over a weekend and listened to it. The last 2 books I read were thrillers, and the first one is Before She Knew Him by Peter Swanson. And you guys know that The Kind Worth Killing is one of my favorite books that I've read in a really long time. It's the first Peter Swanson that I read, which I think has done me a bit of a disservice because I love it so much and I want everything to be as great as that book is. And for me, Before She Knew Him was not that great. So I wound up giving this 3 stars on Goodreads. And I'm so disappointed. And I had heard some like meh kind of feedback on this book, but I'm a fan of his and that's not going to turn me away. And I felt like the story had some potential, but when I started reading it, I don't know where that potential went. So this is a story about husband and wife, Hen and Lloyd, and they moved to a new neighborhood in the suburbs of Boston, which I love, anything in Boston. And they sort of reluctantly go to this block party and like even more reluctantly wind up accepting an invite from their neighbors, Matthew and his wife, whose name escapes me, to come over for dinner one night. So they go to dinner. The dinner's fine. Nothing bad, nothing great, just is. And after they have dinner, they wind up going on a house tour. So they're literally neighbors. They have the exact same house. The wife is super proud of her interior decorating and she wants to like show the house off. So Hen and Lloyd, you know, go on the house tour. And they are in the husband Matthew's office. And Hen sees a sports trophy that she thinks she recognizes as having been a sports trophy for an old neighbor of theirs who was murdered a few years ago. So instantly she is super suspect of her neighbor Matthew. And this is the first chapter of the book. So if anyone is coming for me that I've spoiled something, this is on like book jacket chapter 1 kind of stuff. This sets up the whole premise of the story. So Hen is suspect of Matthew, and she basically goes down a rabbit hole of investigating him and sort of refreshing herself on her old neighbor's murder all those years ago. And her husband Lloyd is worried about her. She's had some issues in the past. He just doesn't want her to upset herself. She's doing good. She's has some mental health issues. She's on some good medication now, and he just wants her to stay on a good path. So without going into spoilers, we see the story from 2 different perspectives, from Hen's perspective and from Matthew's perspective. So we always know what's going on, which again, I think is like good in some ways, but bad in other ways. So there's no real mystery of like what Hen thinks, because we know for sure if she's right or wrong about things, which I feel like could have been like an interesting way of doing it. And that's part of what I thought I was going to enjoy about it, sort of how they played on that. But I didn't like it. And I also felt like some things were like way too convenient. Things just worked out too, like, you know how they say like there are no coincidences? Like I felt like there were a lot of coincidences in this book. And like Hen had a lot of hunches that were so dead on, but shouldn't have been. Like she didn't know enough for like to be able to take those sort of leaps of a hunch type of a thing. So it all felt a little bit too convenient and too easy. But then I enjoyed the relationship between Hen and Matthew developing, because she's suspect of him. He kind of realizes something's up. So they're both kind of dancing around each other in some ways. And that kind of cat and mousey thing I enjoyed. But ultimately, I didn't like the rep of mental health. I didn't like all the convenient coincidency things. And I just didn't like the ending. I thought it was just too unbelievable, just too much of like, no, like this just wouldn't be like, having read his other books, I wanted more, again, like, I wanted more bad things to happen. I wanted more bad things to go down. And it just, I wasn't like suspenseful the whole time. So I didn't have that level of suspense to it. So I'm so bummed to say this because I do love him as an author. But I just didn't love this book. The last book I read is An Anonymous Girl by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. And I had initially had this on my Contemporary-a-thon list, but I wound up reading it before that even started because as soon as I like pulled it off the shelf, I was like, I want to read this. And I did. And I liked it. So this is another kind of psychological thriller. And it follows this girl, Jessica, who is a 28-year-old woman living in New York City. And she's kind of living like paycheck to paycheck. She is a freelance makeup artist. She hustles. She has a lot of family responsibilities. She sends her family money. Her sister has some medical needs that she helps to take care of. And she's really just strapped and pressured and just kind of like under the gun. And she sort of stumbles upon an opportunity and takes advantage of it, where she participates in this college psychology study about morality. Even though she's not a college student, she kind of gets her way in the door. So she's a sassy, savvy chick. And she winds up connecting with the doctor who's doing the study. And they continue the study beyond sort of that initial questionnaire that she does at the school. And what winds up happening is she kind of gets pulled into this dark web that has a big carrot with a lot of money at the end of every session. And it's a morality study, so you can guess that her morals are going to be challenged and she's going to be asked to do some pretty shady things. And she's so desperate for money at the beginning, she does things. And when she figures out that she wants to get out, she kind of can't. And it's told from the two perspectives of the two different women. And again, it's really this like very interesting development of their relationship and the manipulation. And it's not so much unreliable narrator, but it's sort of like, who do you trust? What's really happening? Can you trust yourself? Are you projecting things? Are you seeing things that aren't there? Is this really happening to me right now? What's the game? What have I gotten myself into? And I thought it was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't like the most like edge of my seat kind of thriller. It's not that kind of a thriller, but I was super interested to see what was going to happen next. Kind of in that compulsive flipping kind of a way. I knew what I was rooting for. I knew what I wanted to see happen. I liked that it's not a pretty package all tied up in a bow. Again, you've got some unlikable people. You've got some people doing some questionable things. You've got some people maybe acting out of good places but making bad choices, or maybe acting out of bad places and making good choices or bad choices or all sorts of choices. But I really liked it. I'm a fan of them as a writing duo. I did enjoy The Wife Between Us. The end of that book left me a little bit like, what? Which I've talked about before. But I was very satisfied with the ending of this book. I am a fan of Jess, even though, again, you know, you've got people doing bad things sometimes, or maybe the things you will do for money, the things you will do for family. So it really kind of, she poses, like when she's taking the psych study at the beginning, the doctor poses a lot of questions to her, and I was thinking about them myself. So it really like, it was kind of like what would I do in these situations? And when you really start to think about what you would do and answer some of those questions, it was sort of very revealing and interesting. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done. I will certainly pick up anything else that these two ladies write. But it was not the last book I read, but for the sake of wrapping up this video, it was by far probably one of my favorites of the month, I would say. Like between this and The Testaments and Female of the Species, I would say, were probably my top 3 books of the month. So that does it for September. I don't know how long this was. Hopefully not too long, but all in, again, it's kind of like any exercise is good exercise. For me, like any reading is good reading. So continue to fine tune what I like and don't like, continue to expose myself to things that I might not necessarily read. I talked about this in my other video, like Dress Codes for Small Towns, this book I probably would have DNF'd had I picked it up on my own with no other influence in the background. But I was committed to figuring out what it was all about that Lala loved. And again, there were parts of it that I did truly enjoy, but it's a book that I normally would not have stuck with. So it's all about just exploring stories. And I've talked about this. So I am making a point to not pay attention to any genre and just find stories I love to read. So that does it for September. Lots of books, lots of thoughts, as always. I am super excited that the first book I have picked up in October, which is an arc called I Will Make You Pay, I want to say it's called. I'm loving it so far. I've been reading it I started it yesterday. I'm like 60% into the book and I'm loving it. So hopefully it will continue to be on this. So stay tuned for more on that one. Yeah, so thank you guys for listening, watching, all that good stuff. I hope you guys had a great reading month. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts on them were, or what your favorite or least favorite of the month was. And we can chit chat all that down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.